Rethinking the topic of cosmology obviously involves a lot more than just simply questioning the geometric shape of terra firma. And the subject of the whole electric universe idea is something that I've been vaguely familiar with since even a little bit before I started looking into the flat Earth, but to be honest, there's just been so many various avenues and directions that I've felt drawn towards researching within this broader umbrella of enclosed cosmology for the past year that I honestly haven't had much of a chance to look into the electric universe or electromagnetism all that much yet, But then in the last couple of weeks, for whatever reason, I sat down and listened to almost a 3-hour presentation by Eric Dollard talking about the history of Tesla and electroengineering, and I was really just blown away. Link will be in the description below, and shout out to the channel Immune to BS for putting that up. I think I learned probably more about Tesla in that couple of hours than my whole entire life up to that point. So please note that I'm not at all making any kind of blanket endorsements here about Dollard. I don't know enough about the guy to even think about such a thing, but I will say that I find his material and his stories fascinating. And even if a fraction of what he says is true, well, the implications of that are really pretty remarkable. There's just so much mind-bending stuff in there that it's really hard to summarize it all, and even though I confess I probably don't comprehend most of the technical aspects of it, even so, as I listened, I was really struck by how so much of what he was describing in terms of Birkeland currents and lines of force, and just essentially electricity itself being something which somehow functions in an interdimensional capacity. After a while, it's hard not to see the parallels between all these things that he's discussing with the entire subject of the spiritual realms and hyperdimensional cosmology. Especially when he got to the part where he mentions how Tesla supposedly discovered free energy by basically figuring out the specific electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself. It was amazing. And then he mentions the toroid, and boom, my mind just almost explodes. And so that suddenly made me start thinking about the video made by my buddy D13 Watchman called The Greatest Secret in History Revealed, in which he's talking about the torus as somehow being a way of seeing the various Earth and cosmological models all working together somehow. And so once I started thinking about the torus or the toroid in terms of an enclosed electromagnetic cosmology, whereby electricity and magnetism and plasma and the ether are far less understood by mainstream science than commonly assumed, and almost certainly far more interwoven with the higher spiritual and dimensional aspects of enclosed cosmology, well, it's like things started to really click in a pretty insane way. Because when you overlay this concept of the toroidal electromagnetic field over, whatever flat Earth map rather than a globe, it's pretty amazing how quickly you start to see the similarities and possible connections to all sorts of other concepts out there relating to enclosed cosmology and ideas on how the heavens or luminaries might work, or the question of there being some kind of mountain in the center, like Mount Meru or Olympus or whatever. It also ties into this concept of the cosmic pillar, with a celestial wheel connected at the top of it, and it, totally starts to mirror a lot of ancient depictions of the enclosed world, with there being some kind of dimensional conduit connecting the various realms. It's this idea of the world tree, which does start to tie into the occult concept of the tree of life. But it's this axis mundi concept. It's this trunk that basically somehow connects everything in the enclosed system in some kind of interdimensional way. In Nordic mythology, it's called Yggdrasil. And interestingly enough, that name was featured in the first Avengers movie, or, um, or actually, I think it was the first Captain America movie, which tied into Avengers movie, where they found the Tesseract. And the Tesseract, of course, was this cube which opened up a portal to another part of the universe. But this world tree or axis mundi idea is one that goes very far back into ancient times and seems to have permeated almost every culture, practically to the same degree that a belief in a flat earth did. So. Now, my overall aim is really not to try and dive into every tiny detail and figure out all the, the quote, real mechanics of the cosmos and such, because honestly, I believe that sort of mindset is itself basically the bait that is used by the Fallen One to draw folks into chasing secret knowledge and get pulled deeper into Luciferian ideology of humanism and so on. So I'm way more interested in trying to take a step back and look at all these pieces in a very broad sense and seeing how they all fit together, because it's amazing how they really do, and how much the interplay of the concepts of like electricity and energy, or dimensions and spirituality, or frequencies and vibrations, positive, negative, and so on and so forth. All these terms and concepts and themes, they, interestingly enough, they permeate both the realm of Tesla's, quote, fringe scientific discoveries and the realm of New Age mysticism and spirituality. So this is something I want to tread very carefully into by recognizing and re-emphasizing the fact that we know that Satan has taken every aspect and every element of God's creation and somehow twisted it, commandeered it into being a vehicle for spreading his lies and Luciferian doctrines. And it's always about turning people away from worshiping the Creator and instead worshiping some part of the creation. And so, for instance, we can look at something like the very fascinating topic of cymatics and the experiments which many of us are already probably familiar with, involving the use of various sonic frequencies on a plate covered with sand or salt, and the grains arrange themselves into different complex patterns based on the frequency. And this is no magic trick or work of sorcery, but it's absolutely an incredible demonstration of how indeed this interplay of frequencies and matter and energy and geometry, they're a very real element of the created world somehow. But then, of course, the New Age mystic and the occultist will be all too ready to point to something like that as an example of the reality of things like sacred geometry and how it all goes back to the flower of life and the existence of higher spiritual dimensions and consciousnesses and everything else. So we have to walk a rather fine line here sometimes with this kind of research, because we're constantly having to work to exercise discernment between acknowledging the various pieces which are simply part of God's amazing creation and perhaps been obscured by materialistic Darwinian, Einsteinian physics and pseudoscience and such, and which pieces are then satanic spin-offs of these hidden realities, but then have been twisted into various occult mythologies and esoteric symbolism and everything. I mean, if you do a quick YouTube or Google search on the torus or the toroid, you will very quickly begin to see that the torus itself is employed heavily as a central New Age icon and concept. You could almost say that it serves as a sort of encapsulation of the basics of New Age theology. They'll talk about how the torus is found in many natural forms within nature, very similar to something like the Fibonacci sequence and spiral. And of course, how even in the globe model, the electromagnetic field is said to be toroidal in shape. But then it goes way further into it being sort of a way of visualizing how energy is supposed to simultaneously flow inward and outward during meditation. And the torus is actually used even as a visual aid in meditation, sort of like a type of mandala. and it's also used in a very generic sense to represent the whole idea of the ebb and flow of energy, the cyclical in and out, how everything is connected, and how the all is one and the one is all. And this is just the whole idea of monism or oneism, and so forth. But throughout all this kind of intense research on electromagnetism and toroidal energy, for whatever reason, I keep thinking back to the verse in Ephesians 2, where Satan is called the ruler of this world and the, quote, prince of the power of the air. And I've actually long wondered about just what exactly that phrase in that verse might mean, since most commentaries will tend to focus on just the basic idea of Satan being in control of all the earthly systems of man and the ruler of the fallen world, which of course is absolutely true. But what about that, quote, power of the air? I mean, is that just about flying or the heavens and the stars or whatever? But as I've been digging into all these crazy rabbit trails involving Tesla and Goddard and the universe, the electric universe idea, it's getting harder and harder not to think that it might actually have to do maybe more with just the plain and obvious interpretation of it being the power that we've all seen crashing through the air during a lightning storm. Now, when you contemplate this idea in conjunction with a lot of the pagan mythologies, which feature a god of thunder such as Thor, or of course the Greek god Zeus with his thunderbolts and everything, to me it would seem to fit together in a lot of ways, since those quote gods are really in the end nothing more than just different archetypes for Lucifer anyhow. And speaking of archetypes, you have the whole Prometheus myth, and this idea of stealing the fire of heaven and giving it to man as a gift and everything. And like I said, there's so many avenues to explore and dots to be connected that it's pretty incredible. And so the bottom line for me is that it's the creator who made all of these forces, all of these dimensions, all these systems which somehow work together. But Satan, as a fallen angelic being, was privy to all kinds of knowledge about the creation that we humans were not. And so whatever the physics and or metaphysics of the enclosed world system might actually be, Satan has actually known a whole lot about it since before humanity was even in the garden. And personally, I believe that things like this electromagnetic universe concept might really make sense as a vehicle through which he's working to bring science and spirituality together under one banner, into one cohesive thing. It's into this era of spirit science that we're being primed to accept and embrace the coming Antichrist, and this miraculous power that he will seem to have. And he and his power will be embraced by all sides, by both the religious and the non-religious, by both the mystic and the materialist, by both the occultist and the scientist. And so that's my thoughts on all this. I just kind of wanted to cram it all together, throw it out there, see what you guys think. Really interested in your feedback and seeing what other kinds of directions this might take us. Thanks.